Welcome to our PowerPoint presentation reviewing the film Supervolcano, directed by Tony Mitchell. This movie is set in Yellowstone National Park, and it loosely follows the experience of 4 scientists who monitor the changing geomorphological signs of the Yellowstone caldera, as it indicates a high likelihood of an impending eruption. This documentary-style film reveals some of the scientific processes involved with monitoring volcanoes, such as ground swelling and earthquake observations, as well as measuring the volume of gas emissions and closely examining changes in constituent gases. As a consequence, the film is quite factual and in many ways accurately represents volcanic hazards and the risks associated. Another way in which it is accurate is how the politics influence the hazard mitigation and disaster response. The leading scientist finds himself bending to the will of politicians who deliberately misinform the media of the severity of the looming eruption to avoid mass panic. However, in so doing, they do much of the population of Wisconsin, Wyoming, and Montana, as they did not receive sufficient warning and preparation advice in time to evacuate before the eruption. The film then depicts the aftermath of the eruption, highlighting the inherent risk the Yellowstone caldera poses to all of Northern Europe and indeed the world, as it would disrupt supply chains, flight patterns, and cause mass fatalities. So the next hazard represented in the film includes pyroclastic ash flows. These are enormous destructive volcanic ejections of hot ash, gases, and rock fragments, which travel at great speeds. This is also an example of a primary hazard, as it relates directly to the volcano itself. Next, we have volcanic ash clouds or pyrocumulonimbus clouds. These are great billowing tephra ejections, which release harmful aerosols and gases, pyroclastic bombs, hot ash, and pumice lapilli. This hazard has the potential to collapse the roofs of buildings and cars, trap people in ash deposits, shred plane engines, and cause asphyxiation and blindness. This is another example of a primary hazard, and here you can see an example of ashfall on a lodge in Alaska. We also have earthquakes, which are secondary hazards because they are triggered as a result of volcanic activity. And essentially, this is just sudden violent shaking of the earth caused by tectonic plate action, which sends out seismic waves into the crust. So here you can see the damage caused by a quake in Yellowstone. And then geysers are another secondary hazard. These are tall columns of boiling water which eject steam and gases into the atmosphere. They arise from deep within the mantle and escape through lithospheric fissures. And here are some examples of the pyroclastic ash flows as described on the previous slide. To the left is a real photo taken from the 1991 Mount Pinatubo eruption. And to the right is a still from the film, so you can see there are elements of truth to the production. And finally, we have deadly gas emissions. So these are similar to geysers, and the gases escape from volcanic vents or fissures. They can wipe out entire valleys and silently poison wildlife, plants, and people. Here are some of the examples of the constituent gases written on the left, and you can see carbon dioxide is usually the most abundant. And at the bottom of the slide is an example of condensed sulfur, which has stained the rocks yellow.
The probability of this hazard occurring and how realistic this is based on historical records. Catastrophic geological events such as the event of the Yellowstone supervolcano are scientifically difficult to predict as they are not regular and time and scale are unpredictable. It is highly unlikely that another caldera eruption will occur at Yellowstone again. However, it is possible, and based on research and scientific observations, it is suggested that the probability of this occurring again can be estimated as approximately 1 in 730,000, or equivalent to 0.00014%. This estimate can't be completely relied on as it is predicted based on previous eruptions within the area and an average of the 2 intervals gathered. However, the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, partnered with the United States Geological Survey, are consistently monitoring and researching for any volcanic activity. With technological advances, an event such as this could be predicted anywhere from weeks to years in advance. This provides insight that if an event such as this were to take place again, preventative measures and precautionary action could be taken to deal with the hazard as efficiently as possible. The response to the disaster and how effective this was. This movie shows a very unpredicted and disorganized approach when it comes to the event of supervolcanoes. we can identify the societal, environmental, economic, and political issues that arise in the effects of a catastrophic geological event, such as this. In terms of preventative measures, this was handled incompetently by political authorities and scientists. Scientists in the area, although data was unpredictable, they should have listened to other scientific perspectives and conducted more research as soon as doubts were raised. The Federal Emergency Management Agency was straight onto the possibility of the hazard occurring. However, due to political influence and irrational decision-making, it was decided to address the situation as not catastrophic. This was an attempt to shut down media attention, limit public panic, and try to fix economic issues. After the hazard had taken place, almost everything was shut down, including planes, and the US borders were closed. Search rescues continued for months, and the results were devastating. Conclusively, the unpreparedness and denial caused even greater casualties and severe impact environmentally, socially, economically, and politically.
Were there any pre-existing social contexts or attitudes to the threat in the movie? And my short answer is yes. We observed right from the beginning of the movie that when the USGS representative scientist, Mr. Rick Lieberman, is challenged by a reporter with the claims that Yellowstone is overdue for an eruption, he counteracts and challenges the claim of this reporter with conflict resolution tactics that aim to de-escalate the severity of the issue. He calmly listens to her, reflects, blends, and contrasts the argument presented. Mr. Lieberman also states that there's only 1 in a 600,000 chance that this eruption could happen, and tries to back up his point in a jokingly manner by placing a bet to legitimize his point. This trend is seen along the movie, where the scientist and his colleagues are challenged with the truth of the possible eruption and are often found in a dilemma between being first dismissive of scientific evidence and then to finally seeing the same evidence and being fearful to share it, as they claim a fear of knowing too much and not wishing to instill mass panic. Next slide. What are the key vulnerabilities that this hazard presented? The first vulnerability that we see is the physical vulnerability, and this is presented in the form of geophysical destruction, which includes land degradation caused by landslides and other occurrences, crop and animal death. The second one is social vulnerability, and this comes as a result of the disruption of human activity, civil unrest that ensues once the information is spread out. One of the results of civil unrest comes in the form of panic buying, which we saw in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, as the volcano erupts, we see that a lot of the population is predisposed to illnesses and possible death. The other vulnerability is an economic vulnerability, and this also comes as the result of disruption of human activity, and there's obviously a decrease in social productivity, causing inflation, stocks to crash, a loss and damage in essential infrastructures such as housing, hospitals, the automotive industry such as planes and cars, and finally we see a environmental vulnerability when gases such as carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, methane are released, as these have been proven to have everlasting impacts and contribute to global warming. And these have also been proven to cause respiratory illnesses.
What was the outcome? Yellowstone eruption covered the United States in volcanic ash and emitted vast quantities of sulfur dioxide and other poisonous gases, which can be seen in the image on the left. This explosion of gas was blown across the globe and turning into a volcanic winter, as Cassie and the others have talked about. Many people suffered and were killed, and the drastic measures it took on the Earth's environment and lifestyle is incomprehensible. The picture on the left shows an example of the volcanic ash in the scale comparison to a car, which is, you can obviously see the severity of the eruption and just see how large the eruption was. And the picture on the right explains the area and the area of which the volcanic eruption reached. Next slide. Did the movie cover any aspects of planning preparedness? for the next similar event. When it comes to presenting the important data on the Yellowstone seismic and volcanic activity, the group approached the releasing of the information poorly, which caused widespread panic. They had the knowledge that Yellowstone was going to erupt, and they did not prepare very well at all. This example of poor preparedness helps scientists in the future to understand the important measures that need to be taken at such a risk as this eruption was. The response needed to be more drastic, and this could have saved so many people's lives. The civilians should have sheltered themselves, or at least tried to leave the area.
So how realistic? Yellowstone caldera is a real active volcano in the US, which has the possibility to erupt. It's, however, highly unlikely but not impossible. In terms of accuracy, the movie contains many facts and stylized figures that are somewhat consistent with current knowledge, such as the ash coverage prediction and magma chamber size. Harmonic tremors, earthquakes, hydrothermal events, and a mass exodus of wildlife all indicated an impending eruption. Next slide. National Geographic scientists' prediction of a Yellowstone eruption is as follows. It shot a fatal plume of hot ash, molten rock, and lethal gases thousands of meters into the air. A third of the continent was likely plunged into complete darkness. Pyroclastic flows raced along the region at alarming speeds, burying or shattering anything in their path, and magma spewing out of the ground charred the landscape for kilometers. In the end, 3/4 of the United States would be covered in volcanic ash, and a cloud of sulfur dioxide would be carried over the globe, engulfing the northern hemisphere, and as a result, plunging it into a volcanic winter. As you can see from these screenshots, I think it was recreated pretty accurately. Next slide. The movie did a pretty good job at portraying most parts of the disaster cycle. In response, aid was unavailable because of the heavy ashfall, which made it impossible to drive or fly aircraft. In recovery, they witnessed a dead and barren landscape with a new enormous caldera. In terms of mitigation, due to the rarity of the event, there was no planning to mitigate the effects of the eruption. There had never been an eruption from this volcano in human history, so they could only speculate the effects from geological evidence and could not predict when the volcano may erupt. In the end, there was very little preparation. A small-scale evacuation took place, but nothing to the extent required to save everyone from a super eruption. There were warning signs such as earthquakes and geyser eruptions, but they were mostly written off since the area has a high level of seismic activity regularly, as well as government corruption.